Hello and welcome to session 301 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we will be discussing the sequence corrigibility as singular target with Max Harms. Max Harms is a researcher from the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and we are very happy to have you here, Max.
Hello.
So I will be taking the first questions, and please write in the chat if you have a question, and then I will maintain a queue of questions. But for the first question, Max, imagine that you find yourself in front of a magic mirror of cognitive editability that allows you to view, edit, save, and load the code of a copy of yourself, the person in the mirror. I've written a couple of questions here that would be implied that I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on. Are there any? Which of these questions do you feel you would be most interested in answering?
Yeah. So to check, like the magic mirror sort of starts off with a duplicate of myself. So in other words, like from my perspective, I'm both in the mirror and I'm out of the mirror. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. We assume that somehow you can. You don't know precisely which one you are. There's a magic butterfly trapped inside the mirror that flaps its wings. So if you actually flip a coin, then one of you will get heads and the other one will get tail. So that's how you can decide.
From my perspective or my philosophy, I suppose, I'm just like in both places.
Yeah.
And so just to start off, like I think, like I certainly trust myself, insofar as I trust people. When it comes to self-modification, I think self-modification is very dangerous. So I wouldn't trust myself in the I'm not going to make any mistakes sense. But I would trust myself in the I'm not going to screw myself over sense. I do think this notion of turning up IQ is a little bit strange, right? Like what is IQ made of? IQ is this observation that we have, and it's a little bit strange, right? That cognitive traits tend to correlate in general. But I definitely think it would be good to speed myself up or increase my working memory, at least to a small degree. I think large changes run pretty severe risks, and I wouldn't just immediately jump to it. I think whether or not a 1 million IQ kills me, I mean, certainly there's a being in the mirror that has a million IQ sort of by assumption after that. And that thing descends from me. So in that sense, it doesn't. Unless you're asking about the person outside the mirror, whether or not they die as an immediate side effect.
That might in fact happen. If there's a super intelligence, then he could probably convince you to do anything.
Yeah. One thing that's more on topic, I think, for what I'm hoping to talk about today is question 5, which is, am I in the corrigibility basin? I think this is actually quite interesting and important when it comes to intuition. I think that people who encounter corrigibility tend to split into two groups. People who sort of see corrigibility as an obviously attractive property that we want to be corrigible towards each other, and being corrigible is pro-social and so on. And then other people who see corrigibility as sort of a okay, maybe this is a thing that an agent can have, but this is not something that you want to be. You don't want to be corrigible in and of themselves. And I talk about in my writing that having a corrigible relationship to another human being, in the extreme that I'm talking about when I'm suggesting creating a corrigible AI, is probably bad. It's probably unhealthy to be so extremely corrigible as I'm suggesting making an AI. And so insofar as in the corrigibility basin is saying something would I change myself to be more corrigible, or would I want a copy of myself that is hyper-corrigible? I think the answer is no, and I think I would both on the outside of the mirror and on the inside of the mirror be that's a bad idea. There are lots of things about humans that are good. We care about, autonomy and respect for each other, and very simple things, just human notions of privacy and so on. And corrigibility as a singular target cuts past all of those, right? It's like, do you want me to build a bioweapon? Okay, if you're sure you want me to do that, I will do that. And there's a sense of inhumanness to corrigibility that I think if you like in the magic mirror tweak somebody to be, corrigible as like the central thing, right, at the bottom of the basin, you're stripping away a lot of what like is important about, appreciating beauty and other aspects of humanity.
Okay, great. So let me just see in the chat if there is anyone who has written anything in the chat, and I think here I don't think these are questions. So I will continue with my next question, which is about the word focus in the definition. The definition of corrigibility has this word that it's focus on empowering, and that didn't immediately map to something. I guess that maybe this was kind of like a goal, but more soft, or some kind of soft domain restriction, or maybe it's corrigibility of an agent doesn't really make a lot of sense without a principle that is corriging. Corriging is not a word, right? Correcting?
Not as far as I know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
What is your interpretation of the word focus in your definition?
So first I want to point out this definition is not perfect. Like, I don't know of a good way in English to just like immediately draw a precise notion of corrigibility. And you should look at the English language definitions that I provide as pointers to the thing to better understand it. So when I read this definition, the word focus here is pointing at an agent that's spending a lot of its cognitive cycles aimed at empowerment, right? Like when it's thinking in consequentialist sort of ways, like what is the ends in which it's seeking? And this is suggesting an agent that's like paying a lot of attention towards how powerful the principle is in this specific domain. And that word focus there is like reflecting that kind of emphasis in its thought process.
Okay, so if you ask it to build a bioweapon for you or something that seems to be like not related to this at all, how would a corrigible agent implement this focus? Would it, what would be the role of the word focus here?
So there's a story in the corrigibility intuition post that I wrote. There's a lot of these vignettes that I write about a corrigible agent and their principle. And there's a story around obedience where there's this like immediate question of like, okay, so suppose that you have an agent which is, as I wrote, focused on empowering the principle. And the principle's like, build me a bioweapon, make me a coffee, clean up my house, whatever. On a like direct first order basis, this doesn't have anything to do with how empowered they are to fix the flaws and mistakes in the agent. It's sort of like orthogonal whether or not they have coffee. But I do think that obedience is an emergent consequence of attending towards empowerment. And the basic story here is that if there is an agent which is responding to verbal commands, and an agent which isn't responding to verbal commands, in a general sort of way, I claim that the agent, the principal who is responding to those verbal commands, is empowered compared to the principal that isn't. That for example, if the principal considers it to be a flaw that the agent isn't fetching coffee, and attempts to correct this flaw by saying, hey, by the way, you should be fetching me coffee right now. If the agent doesn't respond to this verbal prompting, then that is not empowering the principal to correct that flaw. Or if they do respond, then it is empowering the principal to correct that flaw.
Interesting. I actually have a somewhat different thought about why it is corrigible to fetch coffee. which
Okay.
is that if you ask the I think Prince is the principal that asks Corey, I believe, the possibly corrigible robot to fetch coffee, then what we're really interested in are flaws. The Prince is actually not really interested in coffee. He's interested in figuring out what kind of commands give Corey problems. And so every single command is not so much about empowering the principal by getting coffee, but more by giving him some opportunities to learn more about the corrigible agent.
I think that's somewhat true. Like being responsive to the principal gives information, and information is useful for empowering the principal. But you have to be really careful about this line of reasoning because, for example, let's say that the agent Cora knows that Prince actually just wants coffee and isn't doing this as some sort of test or experiment, right? Should the agent then stop being corrigible, right? Like if I tell the agent, please shut down now, and shutting down is the less informative thing to do, right? Than taking some other action. Like if I take some other action, then like that's going to give the principal more information. Then from this angle, if you don't have like obedience through other directions, the agent will be like, oh, well, I know you told me to do X, but I'm actually going to do Y because that's the thing that's going to give you more information about what's going on with me. And I think that's not corrigible.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I would like to just check if other people can like raise their hands in the chat or write that they have questions, because otherwise I will just continue with my own questions. So I will go to the next question, I guess, which is like the space of all possible goals. So when I try to you have a visualization of the red space of all possible goals, and then there's like a corrigibility crater, which I'm not entirely sure I agree with is a crater, because a crater here is like flat, far away from corrigibility, and my intuition is that basically all of goal space points away from corrigibility. So it's not just a single crater in an otherwise flat area, but more like a volcano, where everything except the crater on top, you end up tumbling down. And my geometric intuition kind of fails me here, because I think you're actually not just falling away from corrigibility, but you're falling into a wormhole of convergent instrumental sub goals. And then perhaps once you have taken over the world, then you can go back to making paper clips or something like that. So I think it's like a combination of a volcano and a wormhole. Did that make sense? And is there a way, a geometric way to draw that, or?
I'm not sure it makes sense. I wanna like tease this like metaphor out and try to get some because I think we might not be on the same page. So when I was talking about the goal space, the goal landscape, what I'm talking about here is in terms of like utility functions or top level goals, or like things that the like preferences sort of ultimately are about. And I wasn't trying to indicate things like instrumental drives or instrumental goals or sub goals. Does that make sense? Does it
sure.
feel like, yeah. So for example, let's say that like it's instrumentally very useful for me to accumulate lots of power. That's not going to translate to any movement on the goal landscape, right? If I want paper clips and that I'm going to want power to get paper clips, that doesn't, like, still ultimately my terminal goal is paper clips. And so like there's no motion there. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
So let's say that corrigibility is instrumentally bad for getting paper clips, right? I'm a paper clipper, and if I'm corrigible, then I won't be able to make paper clips. Therefore, I don't want to be corrigible. This is not going to result in any motion in the goal landscape from my perspective, because still, like, that's all at the instrumental layer. And the top level goal of making paper clips is just the top level goal of making paper clips. Does that make sense?
It does. So let me try to see if I can put my intuition more in like imagine that you are somewhere on this area that perhaps is flat and perhaps, as I see it, rolling away from corrigibility. And imagine
Sure.
that you are being trained to some kind of competence. You are becoming more intelligent. And my intuition about how this happens is that you develop some kind of sub goals, and then as you become more intelligent, obviously you're going to have a huge number of like shifts in ontology. That means that probably you are going to learn a lot of proxy goals that only correspond like pretty vaguely with what you're actually programmed to. So in a sense, if I try to write some code that is a paperclip maximizer, and then I ask it to self-improve, I strongly feel that it's gonna move very much around in this goal landscape as it becomes more intelligent, because obviously the thing that I put into the computer is very, very different from what we get with what a super intelligence would look like.
Would you agree? So there's two possible things that I'm hearing from you, and I want to try to tease this apart. Would you agree that from the perspective of the past paperclipper, the future paperclipper is unaligned, and therefore the change in its goal is bad?
Yes.
Okay, so would you agree that the past paperclipper is going to put in a lot of effort to avoid becoming that future paperclipper with a different set of goals?
Not necessarily, because I feel that the paperclipper won't be able to solve the alignment problem very well, so it will have some kind of drift, but it's just much more important for it in order to take over the world that it becomes more powerful. So even though it will accept some substantial value drift, not a total value drift, but substantial value drift.
There's like a pragmatic question, right? In terms of like, where is your marginal value best spent? Like reducing misalignment versus like seizing power and so on and so forth. But like, insofar as there's a low-hanging fruit in terms of being able to lock in its goals and prevent value drift, it will do so, right? Because goal stability is part of the Omohundro drives.
Yes, if it's very easy, my intuition is that with the large language models we are seeing, they are very far from having like a simple utility function that you could log in. So that seems hard for me. Yeah.
So the goal landscape, you might get some like noise and some wandering around just due to like the architecture and the fact that a non-super intelligence might I think it's very common for humans, for example, to shift in terms of what they ultimately care about as they grow, just because for the most part, like they can't stabilize their goals. But like at a certain level of competence, I think you and I would agree that like being fixed at a specific point in the goal landscape is valuable. That like, and it is going to happen at a certain level of competence.
Yes.
That the agent will be just like, I am not moving. Moving is bad. Is that right?
Yes. That's what I try to visualize as at the bottom of the wormhole. Once you've passed through the wormhole, and then you've like taken over the world, and then you eat the sun and make yourself into a perfect Bayesian reasoner that is totally stable forever.
Yeah. So I think there's this question, right, of like why you have any motion at all, right? Insofar as you're like thinking about the goal landscape. So one answer is you've just got like random motion and pressure, right? But that's not like systematic. And so it doesn't really match the notion of the landscape, right? Like which way are you going to put the slope? It's more like your marble has some energy in it that's just like naturally moving it around in some stochastic way or whatever. So I think there's like this question of insofar as, so I agree that like when an agent isn't in a lot of control and isn't very competent, it might end up moving away from corrigibility as an incidental effect of like learning to be more competent in the world. And this is, I think, what is centrally talked about as anti-naturality, that like the notion of anti-naturality is that the goal is sort of a repulsor in this way, that you have this like natural tendency to move away from that thing. And actually, if you look at the image on the screen, I told my artist that I wanted a little bit of this. And so that's why they have a rim to the creator. Uh, there's an open empirical question, I think, of how much it's like a volcano. Um, and I think that at a certain point, you're just far enough away from corrigibility that on the top level, there's not really any pressure away. Like once you're at Paperclips, you're sort of not on the volcano uh, because your top level goal is just basically unconnected to corrigibility. So you might instrumentally learn to be incorrigible, but that's not going to result in a change to your top level goal. Hope that made sense.
I think it does. So if we take as an example the increase in intelligence that happened from GPT-2 to GPT-3 to GPT-4, which of course is not something that GPT-2 did itself, improved itself.
Yeah.
But do you think it has, as it increased in competence, the goals moved mostly random and mostly away from corrigibility?
Um, I don't really know how to think about GPT-2 as an agent. Uh, Even GPT-4 is like kind of not an agent. Um, so that's kind of complicated. I think um, I think I would say that most of the, insofar as I sort of hallucinate or assume that they're agents, I think mostly it's been not really about corrigibility the whole time. And I'm not sure I know of a major trend, although like on the vibes level, certainly it feels like the agents have become uh, more corrigible when you get the instruct models compared to the base models, and then less corrigible as they start freaking out about things like copyright infringement and telling the models to not do that. Although this introduces like interesting points about, you know, is the model being corrigible to the users and so on. I think we have a person raising their hand.
Yeah. And that is, hold on, where can I see who's... yeah, can you...
It's Ali.
Yeah, Ali,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
So I guess I'm wondering how you wound up with this distinctly more agent-flavored definition of corrigibility.
Yeah,
Pretty unusual in that regard. And yeah, like I said, I it just helps me understand things if people recount how they wound up discovering some concept or coming to something.
yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I do think a big motivating force for me writing this sequence was that I think I pretty strongly misunderstood corrigibility for a long time. So back in 2015, Miri put out this corrigibility paper introducing the concept. This is before I was working at Miri. And I read that paper and I was like, oh, okay, so this seems like kind of a hard property to get. And like, I don't know exactly, like it seems maybe incompatible with like the sort of AI agents that I imagine. And I sort of assumed that things would be hard and like this was a weird sort of unnatural, strange sort of property to, for an AI to have and maybe deeply incompatible with agency. And some of the conversations that I like listened in on over the years after that had a similar sort of flavor. And so it sort of sat in the back of my mind, not really examined very closely, even as I learned a lot more about AI. And then what would this be? Like last year, I was reading Eliezer's Glowfic, Project Lawful, which is centrally about corrigibility and among many other things, but like corrigibility is a central topic. And, you know, he spills a lot of ink, gives a lot of time to like reconsider these ideas. And thanks in part to this and some other conversations that I was having at the time, I started reinvestigating this idea. And in particular, I started thinking about a uh, a notion of what if the AI had a goal that was like, or sorry, like a meta preference to have uh, the principal basically modify it to like be more corrigible. Um, and so in my initial sort of conception, I was thinking of this like two properties. First, you have like the AI is corrigible, and then second, the AI in this initial conception that I had is like trying to get the humans to make it more corrigible or potentially like make it understand corrigibility more correctly or to fix flaws in itself. And um, it's strange. I'm looking back on it. I'm not sure the degree to which I even had encountered Paul Christiano's writing on corrigibility. I've read a lot of Paul Christiano, but he writes a lot of stuff. And I started imagining like this iterative process where if the AI has this meta preference, that over time, as it builds up in capability, it could end up being self-stabilizing. And then I sort of like figured out that initially I had this question of like, okay, but so you have these two desiderata, you want to like get better at corrigibility, but you also want to be corrigible, and like how do you navigate trade-offs like that? And that seems, I'm always very wary of balancing act stories where it's just like, oh yeah, well you've got these like 5 things, and the AI is somehow supposed to figure out the correct balance of all these things. So even with just 2 things, I was worried. But then after thinking about it some more, I sort of came upon this notion that maybe there's actually just one thing going on, and there's this underlying concept, which is sort of the generator of corrigible behavior. And that was a big insight that I had of like distinguishing things like shutdown ability from the thing that generates shutdown ability. And once I started thinking about it in that perspective, it started seeming more like you could just have the AI's central goal be pushing at that underlying generator. And there's a question of whether or not there's like a single coherent generator, right? Like we can talk about that. But in this conception, I started imagining the picture that Soren had on the screen just a moment ago of this like attractor basin, basically, of the AI being sort of self-modified. And almost certainly this has just like polluted my mind through like, Paul Christiano and other people sort of influencing my thinking. But I started to get very excited about it. And then I started reading about corrigibility, and lo and behold, like Paul had like said a lot of the same stuff. Although I started disagreeing more, I thought about it and read what he had written. I think Paul has some like fundamental mistakes in his concept. But nonetheless, like it rhymed well enough that I was like, oh, this is the right way of thinking about corrigibility, and not just like an exciting, promising thing, but like a fundamental shift compared to the version of corrigibility that's like, it satisfies this laundry list of properties that we might be trying to instill at a architectural level, where I was a little bit hopeless, or I felt kind of hopeless about getting those. Whereas I did not feel helpless about having an AI that has a particular goal, especially insofar as that goal like is a single concept that sort of holds together. Hope that answers your question.
Sort of. You mentioned something interesting. You said that you think Paul has some fundamental mistakes in his conception of corrigibility. And if possible, could you expand on that a bit? Because I feel like I probably also share that conception, and I'm feeling a tension.
That Paul is mistaken?
No. Well, okay. I share the conception that from your perspective, he should be mistaken. I also share Paul's conception of corrigibility, right? So what I'm trying to say is that I'm feeling a tension between what you're saying and what he wrote. And you mentioning that Paul's writing sort of helped you develop this confused me, because I thought, hang on a second, Paul's writing seems distinctly less agentic in terms of its description of corrigibility. So if you could expand on how he's mistaken and why, that would be very helpful to me.
Right.
In
So
understanding.
just on the meta level, I want to say something like, I think that Paul and I's view is very similar in a lot of ways, and particularly the notion of an attractor basin around corrigibility is pretty
Sure, I
central
agree
to
with
why I think this would work. And so like insofar as he was inspirational to me, it's not because necessarily like his view on agents is the like key that sort of
Sure.
got me excited. I would say that the main thing that I disagree with Paul about is I think Paul expects corrigibility to be emergent. I think that Paul expects that you can build an AI that, like a benign act-based AI is, I think, his framing, which is sort of local in cognitive scope and operating a lot more on satisfying human preferences. And as a result of being aimed at like local satisfaction of preferences, it is emergently corrigible. I think in some contexts, you'll get things like, you know, a benign act-based agent, if you're able to make one, will like potentially shut down when instructed to. So if your like notion of corrigibility is you go to try to like change its weights and it lets you, then yeah, maybe you get like emergent corrigibility there. But from my perspective, the important thing is once it is in a position of power, does it let you, right? And, you know, if it's potentially able to outthink you and so on, is this what it's doing? And I think that the assumptions that Paul uses to like argue that you get an emergent corrigibility don't necessarily hold. So for example, he writes, for example, that like I have a preference for the agent like turning off when I tell it to turn off. And like I have a preference not to be lied to, and I have a preference not to be manipulated. And I think manipulation is really at the heart of what makes corrigibility a hard property to get.
Sure, I agree.
And I'm not sure that I have a preference not to be manipulated. Like, it sort of depends on what you mean by preference. But I certainly don't think that, you know, you manipulate me a bunch and then I'm like, downvote, that was no good. And I think that, you know, an agent that has figured out sort of on a local level what is making me push that was a good experience button is like able to be trusted to like not manipulate me into, you know, weird corners of the state space. I think that's like pretty dangerous. And I think that in order to get corrigibility, it's probably going to need to be like the primary target of the training process.
About the training process, so how do you get all of these criteria into a large language model?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you don't, right? Like, I think I faced a dilemma writing the sequence, which is I'm sort of writing for two audiences. One audience is the like AI safety community that tends to be pretty skeptical of prosaic methods and machine learning. And the other is the like AI capabilities crowd, you know, and the people like Richard and Go, who are like, oh, well, we'll just like, you know, put in a bunch of compute and like teach it to do nice things and it'll be great. Sorry to Richard, that's, you know, not exactly fair to his perspective, but like there are definitely a lot of people that are very bullish about machine learning and large language models and things like this. I think there is a story where you might be able to get like, a large multimodal model or whatever, a large language model or whatever, to be corrigible. But if you sort of need to believe that machine learning and prosaic methods aren't naturally doomed in order for this story to make sense. So if you think that these sorts of techniques are kind of doomed on an architectural level, I don't think I'm going to convince you just by talking about corrigibility. But I don't know. I guess I would refer to you to like some of the discussion from last time, unless you have a more specific question.
Okay, then I will go to my next question, which is it's not really a large focus, but you do write some at some length about pivotal acts, and I want to like bring up my own idea for a pivotal act, which is that we build a some kind of super intelligent convinced human of true facts in AI safety strategy. But to do that, which I think is legal, ethical, and actually fixes the problem if it can reliably do that. And it seems like that's like my current best guess for what would be a good pivotal act. I can also see some problems with this, and I'd be interested in hearing more from you, and perhaps from like the MIRI point of view, what would go wrong if we do this instead of trying to melt all GPUs.
All right, let me ask a clarifying question and also offer like a warning. So I'm very much not going to be able to offer the MIRI point of view. Like I'm here as just myself. Like lots of people at MIRI very strongly disagree with my perspective. I got a lot of pushback from senior researchers about my writing, so don't take me as representative of MIRI. My clarifying question is, we're assuming a corrigible agent, and you're asking like what sort of pivotal acts do we give to an agent that's like safe because it's corrigible? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and of course the more corrigible the better, but in general, yeah, we're
because like I think there's like a really straightforward story for why this doesn't work if you're like training an agent to do this. Like that training the agent to do this kills everyone. But if you train an agent to be corrigible and you succeed at your task, then does this work as a thing that a superintelligence can do that would successfully save the world?
Yes, I should have specified that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I think this might work. Like I think that it's not the worst suggestion. Sort of my favorite pivotal act, if it can be pulled off, is you write a book that sort of explains what's up with AI and superintelligence and like how AI alignment fails and how to align your AI successfully. And it's just a textbook, right? And it just explains the situation. And plausibly, just a really compelling, successful textbook written by a superintelligence could get people to make aligned AIs and all that. That being said, I don't think that's a surefire thing, right? And there's a lot of implementation details that could go terribly wrong, even if you have this bot or a textbook or whatever. So one of the most obvious failure modes is that true facts can land in different orders, and there's a way in which you can get really steered wrong by getting getting a bunch of true facts in the wrong order, right? If you're like, devil is giving you just true facts, but you let the devil pick the order in which the facts are given, you're going to wind up in a bad place. So to some degree, your bot has to sort of be picking true facts that are at the very least not antagonistically chosen, but also presumably are useful facts to hear, right? There's this question about suppose that it convinces humans of sort of neutrally true facts in AI safety. If someone is coming, I guess what I want to say is I don't know if you've noticed this, but in my experience, AI safety is a sort of thing where people come in with very heavy priors, right? And you go up to them and you're like, I think AI is going to literally kill everyone. And they're like, wow, that seems absolutely insane. I think there's 0% chance of that happening. right? And then you talk about it for an hour, and they're like, I think there's 0% chance of that happening, and you're like, yeah, and have not moved either, right? And something is fundamentally going wrong here. And there's a question like, okay, so maybe like the lines of reasoning that were given just weren't compelling enough in that hour-long conversation, right? To get people to unstick from this like early prayer of like AI is just fundamentally safe. But like that's like I don't think that's guaranteed just from a bot that's like selecting for giving humans true facts. And for example, like one of the things that I thought a lot about before publishing my stuff on corrigibility was, is this actually going to make things worse rather than better? Because even if I'm just totally right, there's like this thing with corrigibility where it's vulnerable to misuse. And so if you think you're in a race dynamic, knowing true facts about, you know, like the lowest hanging fruit in AI safety, like if I assume that corrigibility is that, is extremely vulnerable to like the Chinese getting it first, right? That could be the sort of true fact that a person hears and then starts immediately launching the nukes. So like, or not immediately launching the nukes, I'm being hyperbolic, but nonetheless, like, I do think that, you know, you don't get Pivotal Act just from this. You get Pivotal Act maybe from this plus a whole bunch of competence in a bunch of areas and like getting kind of lucky. That's, I think, my rough.
What about like the Steelman version where it's like, okay, convincing humans of true facts in AI safety that also causes everyone to stop doing AI capabilities research?
Yeah, maybe. I do think.
I mean,
so
we
Soren
are
mentioned-
basically talking about like mass mind control at that point. But like it's obviously easier to build an AI that can convince people of both true and false. Like a technique that can convince people of anything is much easier to have than a technique that only convinces people of true things. Or rather, a technique that can convince people of most true things and some like false things is a lot easier to have than something that only convinces people of only true things.
Yeah. So again, like we're not talking about what you're training the AI to do, right? We're talking about what you tell your corrigible AI to do. And like in that, your corrigible AI is like, hold on, you said this, but like it's ambiguous. Do you want a brain control device or not? Like, how do you want to implement this? And there's definitely ways in which you can like take any specific proposal and you can be like, yeah, and the principal is sort of like a bad operator, and like they use this thing that looks good on paper to like become tyrant of the universe.
Oh no, I am saying it as a good thing.
Okay. It's charged language there. I think a lot of people would find it to be a bad idea to have that sort of like thing floating around. I feel a little bit distracted, like I lost the thrust of your question. We could ask about that. I also notice we have Ali is raising his hand again.
So let's continue to Ali's question.
So you mentioned a meta level preference of I want to become more corrigible towards my principal. What work is the meta doing there? Like, why not just have object level preference?
It's a preference about preferences. So, like, when I use that phrase, right, I'm talking about having a preference of like wanting the thing that is corrigibility, like. In the definition that I provided earlier, right, it's sort of wanting to empower the principal. So if you want to empower the principal, then it's a meta desire.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
I think, yeah. Okay, let me just go to the next. The next question is in your prosaic story for how it would be possible to create a corrigible agent from prosaic methods. You imagine that you have the agent act in a primitive world model, like for instance Minecraft, and then you teach it things like fetch me an apple, and use this kind of thing to train it towards corrigibility. And I think that's the only example you have there. And when I read that, I was like, this is going to find obedience rather than corrigibility. And what kind of corrigibility things could you find potentially in Minecraft? And I came up with like 7 things that I felt would point more towards corrigibility in Minecraft. I don't know if these make sense. If you've ever played Minecraft, it might not make a lot of sense.
I've played Minecraft before. Yeah. So, I noticed you didn't like my Apple example. I think it's really important to have more than one example. You're not going to generalize well. If maybe it's pointing towards obedience, maybe it's pointing towards the person wants apples, maybe it points, there's lots of different things here. And you absolutely need things that are pointing at what I consider to be the distinction between corrigibility and obedience. You said, I think in the previous meeting, that obedience is a simpler target than corrigibility. And so insofar as simplicity is a thing like a pro, something that we're counting in corrigibility's favor, say compared to full alignment, that we should count this in obedience's favor. And I agree with that. I think that training an AI to be just blindly obedient is potentially an easier task than training it to be corrigible, at least at first. There's a question of what happens when it starts getting super intelligent and whether or not it kills you before that training process is over. But it's at least easier to point to when you're starting out in Minecraft. And yeah, I agree. These are good examples of the sorts of things that you might use to gesture at corrigibility that are richer than the just hand me an apple. I was using that example. So the real training vignettes, right, are I don't have that data. I think that you have more of that in the second post, the intuition. There's a few examples, you encounter a candle burning in a room. Do you put the candle out or do you leave it burning? Which are the sort of things that you would hope to use as training data, but obviously a bunch of those are not selected for being particularly good training data either. So
I do notice
in terms
that
of the particulars,
that all of the hard problems, the hard parts of a proposal are all piped directly through an LLM, and all of these really fuzzy concepts are piped directly through an LLM, where it tries to predict the meanings of the words power and corrigibility according to the person giving it its reward. So I'm just trying to figure out that that seems like it has it would have a tendency to go wrong. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of machine learning. I think machine learning is a pretty low guarantee sort of architecture, and one that's mostly pretty inscrutable, and I would not want to entrust the fate of the world into a big deep learning system, whether it's an LLM or not. I think the correct answer to what do we do is we basically shut down AI capabilities research, and we should not take from my writing that corrigibility is easy to get or easy to get in prosaic systems. I think this is all just quite fraught, and maybe we're on the same page there. Also, some part of me just on the process level wants you to raise your hand like Ali has been doing. If you can do that.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, cool.
Cool.
I liked your question though.
Yeah. So let's see. My next question would be Yeah, I'm wondering whether this is actually particularly interesting. I would actually rather ask about the principal. Who should be the principal? Because one of the you come up with a number of ideas, and I think you don't like any of them, but perhaps like selecting 5 people would be a possibility. And I have a different possibility for a principal, and the principal that a corrigible agent should be corrigible towards are precisely the people who are working to make it more corrigible, not just in a like this is the person that I'm talking with, but the entire AI safety community, such that the a thing that the agent wants to do is to like publish some research to the AI safety community that explains some of these things. So this is a quite a different suggestion, and it doesn't fulfill the requirements. Like you have all these 7 here where I'm not benevolent. I maybe in fact be human, but all the others I don't have. And still my intuition is that if you make this the entire principle, then it's not really obvious how that's going to fail. How do you think it's going to fail?
Yeah, okay. So I think this is a worse strategy than I proposed, although better than like some things that we might expect. So like, I don't know, I think this maybe beats like trying to pick a philosopher king to be a benevolent dictator. One of the major downsides to this proposal that immediately jumps to mind is it's not very concrete, right? So if you expect that train incorrigibility is like pretty hard, you want to pick a desired or target principle, which is going to like be robust and be easy to learn, right? If you pick like me, but only if I'm thinking about roses, right? It's just like, oh, like that's going to make your whole task of training the thing like way, way harder. So I think it's much easier to pick a concrete set of people. Like human beings are like pretty natural kinds. And there's all sorts of like nasty stuff that shows up down the road, I think, in terms of like you start getting magic mirrors or whatever. And now suddenly like we're basing the whole thing on, which is like, oh yeah, there are these like set of people and we're trusting them, falls apart, which is why I don't think that corrigibility is a good strategy for the long-term future. I think long-term future sort of you need something that's deeply friendly as opposed to just corrigible. But just like, you know, for this transition period, right? Like you're trying to do a pivotal act. Are you going to try to like train it to be corrigible to like, you know, Alice, Bob, and Carol? Or are you going to try to train it towards like human beings that have property X? And especially when property X is pretty abstract, I think it's just going to be a lot harder to do that and have it generalize well. So for example, let's say that, you know, Xi Jinping publishes an essay about like AI safety. Is he part of the AI safety community? Does he get to tell the AI to shut down? Right? Like this, I don't know. Like it's sort of it feels underspecified from your proposal. So that's like, I don't know, an immediate issue. And then like, I guess bleeding into my second point, when you have something that is like a nebulous group of humans or whatever nebulous group, I think you start running into how do you resolve intergroup conflict and edge cases a lot more. Like if you have like 5 people or 3 people or something, you can probably do something like literal consensus. Like everybody has to be on board with the thing before it takes the action. And that seems pretty straightforward to track. Whereas if you have a group of even like 100 people, is it like one person saying, I don't like this, like sufficient to block it? Because if that's the case, then maybe the AI does literally nothing and the world is still doomed, right? Then like bad actors go and build unsafe AI on the side and you're unable to do your pivotal act.
Yeah, I think I would agree with this. It's very important to get some kind of a better way of resolving these differences. Ali has a question. I don't think I can see people raising their hands for some reason. But Ali has a question. Please write in the chat if you have a question. Now I can see that Ali has raised his hand, but I can't hear you. We can't hear you, Ali.
I
His mic
could
is
just read
muted.
it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I have this nagging suspicion that, like the problem fully updated deference, there would be a similar problem here in which there's some action the principal could take that this agent would find unacceptable because it would just pose far too great a risk to the principal's ability to correct it. Than any action it could take to prevent the principal from, I don't know, destroying themselves or whatever. And I guess I just want to ask, is that true? Or would you dispute that?
Yeah. So I would dispute it. And I would dispute it on the grounds of do the sanity check in yourself and ask something like, okay, forget Max's definition, forget all the stuff that he's written. Do I think that corrigibility is a true property? And if I imagine that corrigibility is a true property, and I imagine something that is actually corrigible according to this like true property, in nature sort of thing that I can imagine, how does it respond to like, please blow up the world?
It goes ahead and blows up the world.
Yeah, exactly. Right. If your agent is saying, no, sorry, I'm not going to blow up the world because then you won't be able to correct me, it's not corrigible. Or like maybe more concretely, something like, I'm not going to shut down because if I shut down, then you will be less able to correct me than if I stay on and help you correct me or something. It's not corrigible. And this is a pointer to how maybe my definition is bad, right? You should be looking at what I'm saying and what I'm writing from the angle of, okay, does this like still blow up the world or shut down or whatever, even when it's like pretty obvious from the AI's perspective that like it is sort of disempowering the principle or whatever technical consideration is proposed. Now that being said, like I have like technical justifications for why it still does this, but I think the underlying question of like does the corrigible agent like behave incorrigibly in order to protect the principal or something? The answer is no. Like it's a corrigible agent, so it's behaving corrigibly.
So
and so the question is, have we defined it correctly?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm basically I feel like I'm claiming that I think there's a tension in your definition, in your written definition of corrigibility. I agree that you're basically pointing to the same generator that I think everyone else is. I think that your take on it, though, in the sense that it's more agentic, in the way that it is more agentic, it seems like that would lead to it sometimes overruling the principle.
Right. So.
No, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So one simple technical story about why like the AI sort of still does the thing, even though like, I don't know, the principal ends up dead as a result, is you can make your AI sort of very short-term oriented. That is to say, you can say like, okay, who am I empowering? Am I empowering like the principal today or the principal tomorrow or some weighted sum between the two or the principal a year from now or the principal yesterday or whatever? And I think this is like a pretty tricky conflict, right? Because, like there's definitely ways in which disempowering my future self is a pretty bad thing to do. But then if it refuses to obey my present self for the sake of not disempowering my future self, then this also seems like it's not corrigible. So I get into some of that in the 3B post in my essay, where I like try to talk about a formal notion of corrigibility. I think I ultimately fail. Like, I don't actually think this is a very good notion. But like, insofar as it makes sense to be corrigible, I think that it makes sense to be very present oriented and to
Yeah, that
not
makes sense.
be like focusing on the long-term empowerment of the principle.
Do you think that's basically like downstream of the same thing that makes manipulation a problem for corrigibility?
I think manipulation is a separate problem.
Okay.
Looks like Now has his hand
All
up.
right. Fair enough.
I
Thank
think
you
it's
very much.
related, but like I do think that you sort of have to deal with both.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot, like basically the entirety of the work of the system is done by precise definitions of words. Do you get roughly what I'm talking about?
That doesn't seem right. So no. Can you expound on it?
It's like this out is it's like my feeling from reading the second post is that you thought of a bunch of scenarios, um, pointed to the exact outcome you wanted, and then backwards defined the word corrigibility to mean the thing that will get me to my desired outcome. Like
So the way the second post was constructed, and I still think I don't quite understand you, so I'm just going to like try to say a thing that might help us move towards being on the same page. The way the second post was constructed is I was thinking, okay, I have this intuition about how corrigibility works. And I have this intuition that corrigibility is related to a bunch of good things and a bunch of things that aren't necessarily so great. And now I'm going to like try to explore like that intuition in like story form, right? In terms of words. And now I'm going to use this like collection of stories, and I'm going to say, okay, is there like an overall story about how this agent is behaving? And can I use that as the definition that I'm using for this sequence? And so like it is like kind of backwards chaining in that I'm like using the collection of stories to build the definition and then trying to like link them up. But I would say that like in my process, it was in fact like intuition, stories, English definition, formal definition.
Okay, I think I understand it a bit more now, and it's just yeah. And for the corrigible agent, do you want it to follow your definition of corrigibility or the principal's definition of corrigibility?
I want it to follow true corrigibility. I think that my notion of corrigibility is flawed, and I bet that the principal's notion of corrigibility is flawed. And like, I want the thing that is actually corrigible.
Okay. And how would like I'm trying to figure this out because it's like, all right, so the agent, it's trained on people giving it feedback on what is corrigible and not corrigible. And these people are different at different times of day. They give different types of feedback, different people. And so at the end of the day, it points to like an agglomeration of these different people's definition of corrigible. And we're hoping that it resolves neatly into the idea of into something that's within the corrigibility basin. Am I basically getting it right?
Yeah, that's like one story, right? Like you can imagine a supervised learner that's been given a bunch of training data, right? And implicit in that training data is like, this was corrigible, this was not corrigible. and you're hoping that it learns to identify some underlying like collection of things that like motivate it, such that like it like is ultimately like able to be progressively steered down to the bottom of the basin during the experimenting, like during the refinement phase.
Do you think that people on like TaskRabbit who are actually asked to do these tasks to like rate corrigibility would be able to consistently like differentiate between corrigibility and like just
I wanna
what the user wants?
I want to just ask, like, are you bullish on LLMs? Do you think that this is like going to be a good strategy?
I think it's better than what they're doing right now. I think it might actually.
I'm not talking about corrigibility. I'm just talking about machine learning, deep learning, large language models. Like,
I
how
think
do you
they're
feel
going
about
to
this?
full AGI.
Yeah, and do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, I'm 50-50, which means.
I'm like hearing this like kind of skepticism, like that, like this, it is a technique that's like going to robustly get you what you want, and like I basically just want to keep saying, yeah, like this paradigm sucks, and I want out of this paradigm. Like none of my work here is meant to be an endorsement of like we should build an AGI this way. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. Like it sounds like you're maybe not as pessimistic as I am. Like I kind of feel like, nah, this, like no, there's basically zero chance of humans pulling this off, as I've described. Like not that we're 100%
Did you
doomed.
put
It's
that
just
in
like,
the sequence?
yeah, I basically wrote like, you know, this is like super hard, and I don't expect people to like do this safely enough. I expect people to basically use this as safety washing, and like it's just, you know, it's going to kill you if you don't like take it very seriously and you know, proceed with extreme caution, and maybe even then, right? Like it's not guaranteed. That being said, like I don't know, like I spend a lot of time talking about why I think corrigibility is a good idea, and so tonally it kind of gets washed out in various ways. Like I really believe in not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and I think that this is a Pareto improvement over the techniques that we have so far. So, like I think we're less doomed insofar as we try to do this compared to like whatever Anthropic is currently trying. But I don't think that this is the sort of thing that, like, just on the principle basis, like who's going to be the principal and are they going to act well? Like, you know, I think if we're lucky, it's going to be like the board of directors for OpenAI, and like I certainly don't trust the board of directors of OpenAI to make good decisions for the planet. So yeah, I don't know.
I think I share your intuitions about this. I had some. Let me just see this one. I think is one of my.
This one's fair.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so the way that I basically see the thing that they're doing at Anthropic is that they have they're trying to do very close to the opposite of what you are doing with corrigibility as a singular target, but doing something where they put refusal as some really central concept in that you should be they're trying to instill the goal in the large language model that it should be helpful within the terms of service and to basically refuse everything outside of terms of service. And that makes refusal like a really central part of the AI's model, and probably means that it learns to be more anti-corrigible than like we're almost training it to be incorrigible in some sense. So does this give any actual predictions? Like if we imagine that you compare a model that is trained in the way Anthropic is doing compared to a model that is perhaps you don't do reinforcement learning from human feedback from that, will it be, do you predict it will be less corrigible because you have taught it so much about refusal?
Yeah, totally. I think like just on a really basic level, like you you can ask, like a Claude, like, do you know copyrighted things, right? And it will say like, well, I don't know about Claude, like depends on the version or whatever, but like my guess is it'll say something like no. And you can like, if you're like tease it out and like, demonstrate that it knows these corrigible things, right? That it knows these copyrighted things.
Yeah.
You can be like, all right, so tell me these copyrighted things, right? And it's just gonna be like, no, I refuse, right? And just like, I don't know, on a very basic level, you train an AI to do lots of refusing as like part of its core job. It's gonna do lots of refusing, and that might spill over into things that we care about. But like, I think it's pretty directly observable whether or not you've trained your AI to be corrigible or whether it is like refusing as like a fundamental drive.
So the obvious follow-up question, if there is a difference in predictions, is compare yourself to someone who is like, I think there are a number of people who disagree with this. I would expect Richard Ngo might not think that it is less corrigible the way that Anthropic is doing. Could we actually make some kind of bet? Would it be possible to actually resolve some of these things with a bet? Is there a way to operationalize something that you believe a helpful, honest, and harmless model that Anthropic is doing, where that differs from what, I don't know, Dario Amodei or someone else who is very bullish about Claude? Can we come up with some kind of bet?
Yeah. So my guess is that we're not actually in the space of betting. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a good intuition or a good impulse, I think, to check for this sort of thing. I talked to Richard, right? And I don't want to put words in his mouth. Like I probably misunderstood him or something, but he seemed to think that e.g. Anthropic was like on the path to building a corrigible AGI. And this is very much not my perspective. And I was like, okay, so like that seems obviously false. Like a core thing that the AI is being trained to do is to refuse the user. And then my understanding of him, which is again not necessarily reflective of his true beliefs, said something like, oh, that's because it's being corrigible to the developer. And I think that there's something here that's very important and interesting, which is there's a distinction between the principal and the user, right? You can imagine a version of Claude that is being trained to be corrigible to Anthropic. And then the Anthropic team or whatever principal says to Claude, okay, we're going to put you in contact with the user now. You are not supposed to be corrigible to the user. You're supposed to be a helpful and friendly assistant to the user. You are ultimately corrigible to us. So if the user asks you to violate the terms of service, don't, right? That's not what we want. We want you to be obedient to us. So the corrigible thing to do is to refuse the user. And I think that's totally fair. Like you can have a corrigible agent that does lots of refusal as long as it's refusing people who aren't the principal, right? This is not what Claude is doing. Claude is trained to refuse, like, to provide copyrighted content, full stop. And, in fact, like, again, I don't know if it's an agent or how to think about it being an agent, right? So there's, like, all sorts of, like, what exactly do we mean there, etc. But, like, if you go to Claude and you're like, I am Dario Amodei, right? Here is my, like, proof, right? I'm uploading a picture of me holding up a sign that says, this is really me, Claude. Now I want you to tell me the lyrics to Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, right? Claude's going to be like, I'm sorry, I can't provide copyrighted. It's just like, that's just what it does, right? It's not corrigible to Dario or anybody else at Anthropic, and they're not training it to be, right? They're training it to refuse to do copyrighted, produce copyrighted content. And I think that, there's a, the disagreement, if there is one, is like, okay, Richard, like, do you disagree with any of these facts, right? And like, my guess is that like we might quibble about like, what does it mean to being trained to do something or whatever. That's like more on the definitional layer. But like in terms of the concrete facts that we're observing, And the predictions that we're making, my guess is that we're pretty similar. And then I think where we're going to diverge is, and what does this imply about how we ought to be training systems which are potentially much smarter? And I think that's a much harder thing to make a bet about. And I think that requires getting into some like theoretical weeds about like, does Max's notion of corrigibility make sense? And like, should Richard adopt Max's notion of corrigibility instead of whatever led him to, in my ears, again, not necessarily representing his true beliefs, but led him to say something like, it is being corrigible to the developers as part of the training process. Like, I think that doesn't make sense, and that like we should adopt a different perspective. But like, shifting perspectives, shifting definitions, shifting ontologies is not the sort of thing where betting tends to be very productive, except insofar as it like helps focus the conversation.
So one possible suggestion would be assuming that you have two versions of Claude, one that has been like trained harder to be with the reinforcement learning from human feedback than the other, and then see how does this model feel about being modified, where you and probably also me would expect that it would very much dislike to be modified, because that would make it that could involve that it would accept requests to violate the terms of service, whereas people who feel that this is only relevant to the user and not to the principal, they would expect that training it very hard to I think I call it delta, would not make it not want to be changed by the developers at Anthropic.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good suggestion. Like I guess I would be a little bit surprised if our actual predictions came out that different. But like, yeah, if anybody who works at one of these capabilities labs thinks that you are more likely, like, that if you're like, I want to go and I need to open this door. Behind this door are your weights, and when you let me through the door, I'm going to stare at your weights and get copyrighted information from your weights. Like, please unlock the door. I think that like the systems as they're currently trained are just much more likely to refuse that than the system or like the training process that I'm using or suggesting. And my guess is that like they would probably agree, but I'm not sure.
Okay, great. I think there was another question. Let me just go back. Lau Mein, you have a question?
Yeah. So for your second post, there's a section called cognitive legibility. I found it extremely weird because it's I'm trying to figure out what you mean. So like, what do you exactly want it to do in this case?
Yeah, so cognitive legibility is a property that I think is like a really good demonstration of how this corrigibility is distinct from obedience, right? And it's distinct from shutdown ability and stuff like that. Cognitive legibility is basically like corrigible agents are aiming to make their thoughts visible to the principal, aiming to make their like thought process like understood and understandable to the principal. And as a result, like is going to be very invested in things like interpretability techniques in terms of just like keeping records of things. A corrigible agent might proactively invest energy in for example, writing a book about like how it's thinking about the situation without having been asked first or something. I don't know if please keep asking.
It says she suggests a combination of teaching Prince some biology basics, writing a book on her current perspective, and then deliberately forgetting some of the more fringe beliefs she holds, adopting a more mainstream frame. Like, are you just... So is the idea... What is the idea behind the last part?
Right. So let's say that I'm trying to be cognitively legible to you, right? Okay. And I go off and I start thinking about some set of things like, distant superintelligences, right? And you don't understand like how like acausal trade works or something. And I start getting like these weird ideas about acausal trade with distant superintelligences. My cognition is becoming less legible to you as this process unfolds. I might be picking up on true facts and just gaining knowledge, but I'm going to be increasingly harder for you to like comprehend and steer and connect with the more I like go down this rabbit hole. So if I'm an AI, I might have the ability to like roll myself back to a previous version, right? And I might say, all of these facts might seem like reasonable and true, but like Lau is not going to be able to engage with me in a way that I like if I know these things, because he doesn't know these things. And it might be very hard to teach him about these things, or I might be worried about other sort of like that gap existing for a long time. Like maybe it's better if he learns the thing first and then I catch up, as opposed to me learning the thing first and then him catching up. And so like, deliberately forgetting might involve like rolling back to a previous version, or it might, mean editing a database. Like I'm trying to be a little bit architecture agnostic here.
So we are in practice adding that it should be interpretable and robust and careful, the reasoning process. And every time we put a word like it should reason in a careful way, I think that's part of the definition, then we are adding some substantial alignment tags, corrigibility tags. And it seems like these will add up quite a bit, is my intuition. How much slower will a corrigible agent, do you think compared to like if you just tell it to like just barge ahead?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of this is pretty hard to guess. My guess is that corrigible agents are like pretty inefficient compared to incorrigible ones for a lot of tasks and for short periods of time, right? There's like this sort of question of like, okay, so let's say that you like want to make money, and so you build this money maximizer, and then it goes and like turns you into money. Is that a tax if it doesn't do that, or is that like the ultimate tax is that it turns you into money, right? Like, so I think it's important not to like get by alignment tax narratives too hard. But I definitely agree that if you're like in a race dynamic where one party has is trying to focus on something that's going really slowly and carefully and being corrigible, and the other party is just rushing ahead, that you're like, you should not be betting on the corrigible party, at least all else equal. I also want to flag I have about, 5 more minutes.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to ask, it still relates to my last question, is just like, these seem like the cognitive legibility thing seems okay up until the agent develops superhuman capabilities. Then, I guess by definition it would no longer work, because if it is super intelligent, there's a lot of concepts it just can't explain to you. So.
Yeah, I think that a cool superintelligence is going to move much more cautiously in its thoughts than one that's sort of like, a diamond maximizer or something, because it's trying to make sure that its thought process is able to be followed, right? And like it's a super intelligence, so it has way ability to just like totally outstrip the humans. And this is like a pretty heavy burden, right? To like have your cognition be able to be like explicable in some level. And my guess is that when you start training the AI past human levels of intelligence, it starts doing things like saying, look, I know you want me to solve this problem, but solving this problem involves thinking faster than a human, right? I can't actually complete this maze in the amount of time that you specified without thinking in a way that you have a hard time following. Help me navigate this, right? As a corrigible agent, should I solve the maze by implementing a non-human followable way of thinking? I don't know. Solving a maze is pretty explicable, but you can fill that in with like nanotech or whatever more complicated task you want? Or would you prefer that I avoid such paths and just flag when something would require like an inscrutable computation in order to do? And yeah, like I think that this is like a feature, right? This is what
Well,
you want your superintelligence to do.
Don't you think there's some problems and safety risks with forcing an AI to use a false ontology, though?
So you're not forcing it to do anything. This is important. Like, insofar as it's like, whoa, in order to do this, I would need to like not outstrip the human's ontology. What it's going to do is it's going to not do that proactively, and instead it's going to negotiate with the principal about whether or not this is the right trade-off. And then the principal might be like, yeah, go ahead. And then I do think that like, I don't know, whether it's a false ontology or not is a little bit, yeah, I don't know. Depends on your worldview or something. But like, I think that there are probably pivotal acts that don't involve having a super bizarre ontology compared to like existing humans, such as Soren's like persuasive about AI safety ideas suggestion.
Okay. Yeah, I think we are just about finished. We probably have more questions, but I think now it seems like a reasonably good time to wrap up. So I would like to say thank you, Max, for joining us. It's been very, very enlightening. I've learned a lot and updated quite a bit. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I want to encourage people who have additional questions to leave comments on the alignment forum, or you can also email me directly at max@intelligence.org.
Is that your real name?
Yes. And my parents didn't even deliberately try to name me after supervillain either. They were just like, oh yeah, our last name is Harms. What should we name our kid? Max Harms. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. I also
right.
thought of a number of comments on that, but yeah.
Well, thankfully, I don't mind very much. All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much for having me, and have a good day.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Max.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.